The bell above the shop door chimed like it always did. Soft, ordinary, almost forgettable. But the woman who stepped in that morning wasn't ordinary. Her clothes were worn, her shoes half torn, and her hands trembled as she held a few crumpled bills. She looked around quietly, as if the shelves might judge her for being there. When she finally reached the counter, she placed a small bundle of baby clothes, secondhand, discounted, almost weightless, and whispered something so softly I almost thought I imagined it. "Please don't tell my little girl they aren't new." Her voice cracked on the word new, and in that moment, every number I'd ever chased, every sale I'd ever celebrated, felt meaningless. Because some payments aren't made in cash, they're made in love, pride, and pain you can't measure on a receipt. The morning started like any other. Receipts scattered across the counter, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, and sunlight leaking through the dusty window blinds of my small baby boutique. It was one of those quiet weekdays when customers came in slowly, one by one, mostly young mothers comparing prices, grandmothers asking for discounts, and the occasional father who pretended he wasn't lost among pink ribbons and pacifiers. Business wasn't booming, but it was enough. Enough to pay the rent, enough to keep the lights on, enough to dream about something better next month. I'd learned to measure happiness in enoughs. The doorbell chimed, a familiar soft jingle I barely noticed anymore. But this time, it carried something different. The kind of stillness that makes the air pause before reality catches up. A woman stepped inside, moving carefully as though afraid to disturb the silence. Her clothes were plain, a faded blue shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, and her sandals looked worn from years of long walks. She wasn't like my usual customers. No stroller, no shopping bag, no companion. Just a quiet, deliberate presence. She stopped near the rack of baby clothes, the discount section, where the fabric was slightly uneven, where tiny tags read clearance in red ink. She touched each outfit gently, almost reverently, like she was afraid her fingers might leave marks. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes but tried anyway. She reached into her shawl and pulled out a small purse. The zipper was broken, the edges frayed. She opened it and began counting coins, slowly, carefully, the sound of metal tapping against glass filling the quiet room. 1 coin, 2, 3. Her hands trembled as she placed a few crumpled notes on the counter. "Is this enough?" she whispered. I looked at the total, 580 rupees. She had 500, maybe a little less. I hesitated. The rule was clear, no discounts without approval. But something in her eyes made me break my own silence. "It's fine," I said softly. "You're good." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "But it says, it's fine," I repeated, forcing a small smile. Consider it a birthday gift from one mother to another. She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly, as if afraid that gratitude might make her voice break. She reached out to take the paper bag, then paused. That's when she whispered it, so softly I almost missed it. "Please don't tell my little girl they aren't new." For a moment, the room froze. The fan kept turning, the sunlight kept shining, but the air changed, heavier, sharper, realer. I nodded, unable to speak. She smiled again, this time with tears forming at the edge of her eyes. "She's been asking for a pink dress for weeks," she said quietly. "Every day, she stands outside the shop down the road, looking at the mannequins. I told her I'd get her one for her birthday. She said she wanted it to smell like new." Her words pierced through me, quiet but deep, the kind of truth that doesn't shout, it just stays. "She won't know," I said gently. "I promise." She nodded again, clutching the bag to her chest like it was made of glass. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means." When she turned to leave, I noticed something. The hem of her shawl was torn. The strap of her purse had been stitched back together with pink thread, the same color as the dress she'd just bought. The doorbell chimed again as she stepped outside, sunlight hitting her face. She squinted for a moment, then walked away, slow, deliberate steps, as though she was holding her entire world in that small paper bag. For a long time after she left, I couldn't move. I stood behind the counter, staring at the spot where she'd stood. I'd seen hundreds of customers before, some happy, some demanding, some indifferent. But none of them had ever left something so heavy behind. Silence. I looked down at the register. The remaining 80 rupees she couldn't pay sat there like a question I couldn't answer. It wasn't about the money, it never was. It was about what her whisper meant, about pride and pain existing in the same breath, about how love can sometimes sound like shame when the world measures worth in price tags. Later that day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I closed the shop early. I walked down the road toward the market, the same one she'd mentioned, the one with mannequins dressed in bright colors behind glass walls. I found the dress she must have meant. Pink satin, sparkling sequins. Price tag, 2,300. It wasn't the kind of thing she could ever afford. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't need to. Because the love in her voice when she said, "My little girl," was worth more than anything hanging behind that glass. When I returned to my shop, I pulled out the leftover pink fabric from an old shipment. A few extra bows, ribbons, tiny scraps of lace. I spent the evening sewing them into little hair clips and small cloth flowers. By morning, I placed them in a small white box and wrapped it with tissue paper. When she came again 2 days later, this time to thank me, I handed her the box before she could speak. "It's from the shop," I said quickly, pretending to look busy. "For your daughter." Her eyes filled instantly. "But, no buts. It's nothing fancy, just something to match the dress." She took it with both hands, trembling slightly. "I don't know how to repay you." I smiled. "You already did. Yesterday." She tilted her head. "Ow." By reminding me, I said what this shop was really built for. That night, when I locked up, I wrote something on a sticky note and placed it near the register. It said, "Every customer has a story. Listen twice. Once with your ears, once with your heart." And from that day on, every time the doorbell chimed, I reminded myself I wasn't just selling things. I was witnessing lives. For days after that morning, I couldn't shake her voice from my mind. "Please don't tell my little girl they aren't new." It followed me everywhere, while I dusted the shelves, while I balanced the books, even while I tried to sleep. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was something deeper, something that tugged at the quiet parts of me I'd stopped listening to long ago. Running a shop teaches you a lot about people. How they look at price tags before faces, how the rich talk louder, how the poor talk less. But that woman, she didn't fit into either category. She carried her pride like armor and her love like a wound. And that whisper wasn't about a dress. It was about dignity, the one thing the world often forgets to leave within reach for those who struggle. The next few mornings, I found myself glancing at the door each time it chimed, half expecting her to walk in again. Not for the money she owed, I'd already covered that, but because I wanted to know more about her daughter, her life, her strength. But she didn't come. Instead, other mothers did, laughing, bargaining, complaining about fabric quality, asking if I could throw in something extra. I smiled through it all, but part of me stayed elsewhere. With her, with the quiet, with that sentence that still echoed. It made me realize something uncomfortable. In all my years running this business, I'd stopped seeing people. I saw customers, receipts, sales, not stories. That realization hurt because I hadn't always been that way. 15 years ago, when I first started this shop, it wasn't about profit. It was about purpose. I'd grown up watching my own mother sew clothes late into the night for neighbors who couldn't afford store-bought ones. She'd patch up old dresses and make them look brand new. "Clothes carry stories," she used to say. "Never judge someone's fabric until you know what it's been through." I'd forgotten that. Somewhere between rent deadlines and supplier arguments, I'd traded compassion for convenience. Until that whisper reminded me. 3 days later, it was raining when she returned. The bell above the door jingled softly, and when I looked up, there she was, shawl still faded, sandals still worn, but her eyes had changed. She was smiling this time, the kind of smile that comes from somewhere deeper than comfort. She walked straight to the counter and placed a small packet on it. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," I replied, genuinely glad to see her. "How was your daughter's birthday?" Her smile widened, and she let out a small laugh, fragile but real. She danced. The whole day, she wore the dress from morning till night. She even slept in it. She said it was the best birthday she ever had. I felt my chest tighten. I'm glad, I said. She deserves it. She nodded, pushing the packet toward me. I came to return this. I looked inside. It was the same white box I'd given her, the one with the hair clips and ribbons. Except now, it also held a single piece of homemade cake wrapped in foil. I wanted to thank you, she said. We didn't have much, but we saved a piece for you. I swallowed hard. You didn't have to, she interrupted gently. I wanted to, because you didn't just sell me a dress. You gave my daughter a moment she'll never forget. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd given discounts before, helped customers before, but this felt sacred. I took the box and smiled. Then I'll keep it. Thank you. After she left again, I didn't open the cake right away. I placed it beside the register, as if it were something precious. For the rest of the day, every time a customer argued over 10 rupees or demanded a new color, I'd glance at that small foil-wrapped piece of cake and remember, not everything valuable has a price. By closing time, I made a decision. I didn't want that whisper to just haunt me. I wanted it to change me. That night, I sat at my desk and pulled out my old notebook, the one where I used to scribble ideas back when I believed this shop could mean something. On a blank page, I wrote 3 words in big letters. Kindness policy, start tomorrow. I didn't know exactly what it would look like yet, but I knew what it would feel like. No mother would leave my shop ashamed again. The next morning, I put up a small handwritten sign near the entrance. Every child deserves something new, even if it's not bought, but given with love. Ask about our gift rack. I cleared one entire shelf, filled it with clothes customers had exchanged or outgrown, pressed and folded them neatly, and added a small card to each. Brand new, just for you. That was the beginning. At first, people were confused. Some thought it was charity. Others thought it was marketing, but slowly, quietly it began to work. Women who couldn't afford much began coming in, hesitantly at first, then regularly. Not because they wanted free things, but because they felt safe here. Seen. One afternoon, an older man stopped by and said, "My daughter told me about your shop. She says it's a place with heart." I smiled, not fully grasping the weight of what he meant until he added, "That's rare nowadays." A few weeks later, I saw the same woman again, the mother from that first morning. She came in holding her daughter's hand this time. The little girl had big, curious eyes and hair tied with one of the pink ribbons I'd made. "Say thank you," the mother whispered gently. "Thank you," the child said shyly, hiding behind her shawl. I crouched down, smiling. "Do you like your dress?" She nodded. "It's my favorite. Mama says it's special because someone kind made it new." That moment, that single sentence, made every struggle worth it. Because somewhere between running a store and running from my purpose, I'd forgotten what it meant to matter. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how her story, their story, might never be told if I didn't tell it. So I began to write, not for fame or followers, but as a way to remember the day that changed everything. I titled it simply, "The Whisper That Changed My Shop." I wrote about her, about pride, about kindness, and how sometimes the smallest sentence can rebuild someone's faith in humanity. I didn't know it then, but that little story would travel far, shared online, reposted, translated into languages I couldn't even read. And people began visiting not just to buy, but to give clothes, toys, books, hope. The whisper that once broke me had become the heartbeat of something new. Kindness has a way of growing quietly, like grass between cracks in concrete. You don't notice it at first, but one morning, you wake up and realize it's everywhere. That's how it began with the gift rack. What started as one shelf turned into 3, then an entire corner of the shop. Customers began leaving small donations, sometimes a dress, sometimes shoes, sometimes a handwritten card that said, "For a little one who deserves to smile." I never seen anything like it. It wasn't charity. It was connection, a silent promise between strangers that nobody would leave empty-handed again. It was a Saturday when I first realized just how far that promise had traveled. The shop was packed, mothers chatting, children laughing, the scent of fresh detergent mixing with rain from outside. And right in the middle of it all stood a woman I didn't recognize, holding a baby wrapped in a soft blue blanket. "Are you the owner?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said, stepping forward. She smiled shyly. Someone told me you help people who can't always afford things. My sister said I should come here. She lives in the next town. I nodded. Of course. Take whatever you need. Her eyes filled with tears. You don't understand, she said. When my son was born, I didn't even have a blanket for him. A nurse told me to use my shawl. I promised myself I'd never let that happen again. But now, she trailed off, clutching the baby tighter. I led her to the rack. She picked a few things hesitantly, a tiny sweater, a cap, a soft toy shaped like a bear. When she reached the counter, she asked in a whisper, "How much?" I shook my head. Just a promise. When you're able, help someone else the way someone helped you today. Her lips trembled. I will, she said. I swear I will. That afternoon, I sat at the counter watching her leave. The baby slept soundly in her arms. And I thought about how one whisper, one fragile moment of human honesty, had started all this. It made me wonder how many other lives were quietly hanging by a thread, waiting for one kind word to hold them together. 2 weeks later, a man in a crisp white shirt came in. He looked out of place, too polished, too impatient. He kept glancing at his phone, sighing loudly as if the world owed him an apology. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "Are you the one running this initiative?" I nodded cautiously. "Yes." He frowned. "My wife keeps talking about this place. Says it's inspiring. She made me bring donations." He dropped a bag on the counter. Inside were baby shoes, brand new, still in boxes, and several outfits with tags. "She said you'd find someone who needs these," he said, mimicking his wife's tone. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "These will make a lot of kids happy." He looked at me for a moment, as if trying to understand why I sounded genuine. Then, almost grudgingly, he asked, "You don't take pictures of people? You don't post this online?" I smiled. "No, dignity doesn't need an audience." He stared at me for a long time before finally nodding. "That's rare," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then he turned and left. But 2 days later, his wife came by, not with donations but with coffee. She placed the cup in front of me and said, "He hasn't stopped talking about your answer." Word spread faster than I could have imagined. Mothers from nearby towns began coming in, some to donate, some to buy, some just to talk. We started a small notice board by the door. Messages from one mother to another. The first note was from the woman with the whisper. It said, "You don't have to be rich to give, just willing to care." Others followed. "My child wore clothes from here to her first day of school. Thank you." For every mother who ever felt ashamed to ask, "You're not alone." The board grew so full that I had to pin notes to the wall around it. Each one was a story, a heartbeat, a reminder that kindness wasn't rare, just often unspoken. One evening, as I was closing the shop, I noticed a familiar face standing by the door. It was her, the first woman, the one who'd started it all. She smiled shyly, holding her daughter's hand. "I hope it's okay," she said. "We brought something for the rack." Her daughter held up a small paper bag proudly. Inside were 2 dresses, washed, ironed, neatly folded. "They're small for me now," the little girl said. "Mama says someone else can have them." I knelt down, my throat tightening. "That's very kind of you." She grinned. "I wanted to give them because they're still new." Her mother's eyes glistened. And I understood. What began as a whisper of pain had become a voice of generosity. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, surrounded by old receipts and new letters from people whose lives had somehow intersected with mine. And I realized something. The world wasn't cruel by nature. It was just tired of pretending, tired of racing, tired of forgetting that simple things still matter. Maybe all people needed was permission to be kind again. The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor, a journalist from a local paper. "I've been hearing about this place," she said, notebook in hand. "They call it the shop with a soul. Mind if I do a story?" I hesitated. "As long as you don't turn it into a charity feature." "It's not about pity." She smiled. "Then what is it about?" I looked around at the clothes, the little notes, the empty rack waiting for tomorrow's miracles. "It's about people remembering they still have hearts," I said simply. When the article came out a week later, the response was overwhelming. Letters, phone calls, packages, they came from everywhere. Some people sent clothes. Some sent money. But the most meaningful ones sent stories, handwritten, heartfelt, fragile. One woman wrote, "I lost my job and thought I had nothing left to offer. Then I read about your shop and remembered I could still give warmth." Another said, "I used to feel ashamed for being poor. Now I feel proud for being human." I read every single one, and each one felt like a piece of light finding its way through the cracks. By the end of that month, we weren't just a shop anymore. We were a community, a living, breathing reminder that empathy doesn't need permission. But the moment that sealed it, the one that truly broke and healed me at the same time, came a few days later. It was late evening. I was cleaning up when a delivery boy arrived with a small parcel. "No sender's name," he said, handing it over. Inside was a pink dress, brand new, still in its packaging, and a note that read, "For another little girl who dreams of new things. From one mother who once couldn't afford them." I sat there for a long time, the dress in my hands, tears blurring the words. The whisper had come full circle. Months passed, but her voice never left me. That gentle whisper, "Please don't tell my little girl they aren't new," had somehow become the foundation of an entire movement. The shop that once stood half-empty now buzzed with laughter, chatter, and life. Mothers who used to hide their struggles now spoke openly, helping one another, sharing recipes, jobs, and advice. The gift rack had turned into something far bigger, a corner of hope. People from nearby towns began sending clothes, toys, even handwritten notes wrapped with kindness. Every package had a story, and each story reminded me that compassion wasn't something you bought, it was something you chose. It wasn't just my shop that changed. The change started seeping out into the streets, the markets, and the community itself. One day, the vegetable vendor next door told me, "Bia, I stopped charging an old woman who comes every Thursday. She reminds me of your customer, the one who started all this." Another shopkeeper added a donation box with a sign, "If you can't pay, take what you need. If you can, leave what you can spare." It was contagious, this quiet goodness. No speeches, no campaigns, just people remembering how to be human again. I often wondered if that woman knew what she'd started. If she had any idea that her small act of courage, walking into my shop with trembling hands and honest eyes, had set off a wave that changed hundreds of lives. That it was almost a year later when she came back. The moment she stepped in, I recognized her immediately. Same soft eyes, same gentle posture. But this time, something was different. She stood taller, her steps firmer, her clothes cleaner, though still simple. And beside her walked her daughter, now 6, wearing a neatly pressed school uniform and carrying a small backpack. "Do you remember us?" she asked, her smile uncertain but warm. I laughed softly. "I don't think I could ever forget you." She nodded, her eyes misting over. "I want to show you something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photo, her daughter standing in front of a school building, holding a certificate. She won a reading award, the mother said proudly. First in her class. The teacher said she reads like she's seen the world already. I looked at the little girl, who was grinning shyly, clutching her mother's hand. "That's amazing," I said. "You must be very proud." "I am," she whispered. "But I wanted to tell you something else." She hesitated, then looked down before continuing. "When I first came here, I was embarrassed. I didn't want to be seen as poor. I thought people would pity me. But that day, it didn't make me feel small. You made me feel human." I swallowed hard, the air suddenly thick around us. "You reminded me," she said softly, "that even when life breaks you, kindness can piece you back together." Her daughter tugged her sleeve. "Mama, can we put our note on the wall too?" The mother smiled and nodded. Together, they wrote something on a small piece of paper and pinned it beside the others. When they left, I walked over to read it. It said, "To the person who gave my daughter her first pink dress, you also gave me back my pride. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." I couldn't hold back the tears. I closed the shop early that day and sat alone behind the counter, thinking about everything that had changed since that whisper first broke me. Before that day, I used to think success meant more customers, more money, more expansion. But now I knew better. Success wasn't about numbers. It was about moments, about the kind that remind you you're part of something bigger than yourself. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of her story. The gift rack was now a full section called the Hope Corner. The messages wall had grown so large that we had to move it outside the shop window, where people could stop, read, and add their own. Some left thank you notes. Others left prayers. One man wrote, "I came here to buy. I left wanting to give." Another wrote, "This shop restored my faith in people." I realized then that the whisper hadn't just changed me. It had changed everyone who heard it, even indirectly. One morning, a journalist returned, the same woman who had first covered our story. She was holding a camera and a folder of photographs. "I've been documenting what happened since our first interview," she said. "Do you know what they're calling it now?" I shook my head. "The Whisper Movement," she smiled. "Dozens of small shops across the state have started their own gift racks. Some are even using your line, 'Every child deserves something new.'" I laughed quietly, still amazed. "All from one whisper." She nodded. "All from one heart that decided to listen." Before she left, she asked me one last question. "What would you say to that mother if she could hear you right now?" I looked around the shop, at the dresses hanging neatly, the laughter of children, the letters fluttering on the wall. "I'd tell her," I said slowly, "that she thought she came here for a dress. But she came here to remind the rest of us what love really looks like." Years later, when I finally passed the shop to my niece, I made her promise me one thing. "Don't ever let it become just a business," I said. "It's a bridge between those who have and those who still believe." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'll keep it alive, Uncle." And she did. Even today, the bell above the door still chimes the same soft way. The Hope Corner still stands. The notes still grow like vines across the wall. Messages of kindness, gratitude, and strength. And sometimes, when the afternoon sun hits the counter just right, I swear I could still hear her voice. Not in sadness this time, but in peace. "Please don't tell my little girl they aren't new." Except now, the words sound different. Now they mean, please tell her the world still has good people in it. I used to think people were broken because of poverty. Now I know it's indifference that truly breaks us. That quiet look away when someone is struggling, that shrug when we think it's not my problem. But kindness, even the smallest act, rebuilds more than lives. It rebuilds faith. That poor mother didn't walk into a store that day. She walked into someone else's heart and left it better than she found it. And me? I no longer run a business. I tend to something far more fragile. A reminder that when love and dignity meet, miracles happen. Because sometimes all it takes to change the world is one whisper brave enough to be heard.